Hey guys, tonight we begin with something truly dark. A profession so brutal, so psychologically devastating, and so socially isolating that most people would rather starve than take the job. We're diving into the life of a medieval executioner, the man behind the axe, the sword, and the rope. Forget the Hollywood version of the grim Reaper figure calmly dispatching criminals. You probably wouldn't last a single day. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've just been appointed executioner of a small medieval town. Maybe you were chosen because you committed a crime yourself. Or perhaps you're the unlucky son of the previous executioner, cursed with inheriting the family trade. Either way, your life as you knew it is over. The moment you accept this position, you become something less than human in the eyes of your community. You are now the living embodiment of death itself. And everyone, from the noble in his castle to the beggar in the streets, will treat you accordingly. Your first morning begins before dawn, not because you're eager to start work, but because you can only move through town when most people are still asleep. You see, executioners are considered so unclean, so tainted by death, that you're forbidden from walking the main streets during daylight hours. You must use back alleys, side roads, and paths that keep you away from decent folk. If you accidentally bump into someone on the street, they can legally demand compensation. Your touch is considered polluting. You live on the outskirts of town naturally. No landlord would rent to you in a respectable neighborhood. Your home is usually provided by the city, but it's located near the execution grounds, the town dump, or the leper colony. Places where decent people don't go. Your neighbors, if you can call them that, are criminals, prostitutes, and others pushed to society's edges. Even they look down on you. Breakfast is a lonely affair. You can't buy food from the regular market. Shopkeepers are allowed, even encouraged, to refuse your business. Some towns have laws requiring executioners to wear special colored clothing, bells or markers, so people can avoid you. In some places, you're forced to wear a red and yellow outfit, the colors of blood and cowardice. The message is clear. You are marked. You are different. You are cursed. Yes, you receive a small salary from the town council, but it's barely enough to survive. Most of your earnings come from side jobs that nobody else wants to do: cleaning the public latrines, removing dead animals from the streets, skinning animals for leather, burying plague victims. Every job connected to death, filth, or disgrace falls to you. And the pay for these jobs is minimal, because who are you going to complain to? But there's another source of income, one that makes your stomach turn. After an execution, the body belongs to you, and there's a market for body parts. Medieval people believed that the blood, fat, fingers, and even rope used to hang someone had magical or medicinal properties. Desperate people, usually the sick or superstitious, would pay you for pieces of the executed: a vial of blood to cure epilepsy, a severed hand to use as a good luck charm. The rope from a hanging, called a hangman's rope, was believed to cure headaches if worn around the neck. You feel sick even thinking about it, but you need the money. Your children need to eat. So you harvest what you can and sell it quietly, usually at night, to those too desperate to care about your reputation. This macabre trade makes you even more hated, even more feared. People whisper that you practice dark magic, that you commune with the devil. And honestly, given what you do for a living, you're starting to wonder yourself. The psychological weight begins immediately. You're not just physically isolated, you're spiritually isolated. The church barely tolerates you. While you're technically Christian, many priests refuse to give you communion or allow you into services. Some churches have special sections where executioners must stand, far from everyone else, marked and separated like lepers. When you die, there's a good chance you won't be buried in consecrated ground. Your soul is considered tainted. You haven't even performed your first execution yet. This is just your normal daily existence. The actual work of killing people, that's still to come. And trust me, it's going to be much, much worse than you can imagine. So you sit in your isolated cottage on the edge of town, eating your meager breakfast, and you wonder, how did my life come to this? And more importantly, how long can I survive doing this job before it destroys me completely? Let's talk about your actual job description. Because being an executioner isn't just about swinging an axe and calling it a day. You're responsible for torture, interrogation, punishment, public humiliation, and disposal of bodies. You are the physical instrument of the state's justice system, and medieval justice is brutal, creative, and utterly merciless. Your workday usually begins with a summons from the town magistrate or lord. Someone has been sentenced, and your services are required. Maybe it's a thief who stole bread. Maybe it's a woman accused of witchcraft. Maybe it's a political prisoner whose only crime was being on the wrong side of a power struggle. You don't get to ask questions. You don't get to judge innocence or guilt. You just do what you're told. First, there's the torture. Before many executions, especially in cases of serious crimes or accusations of heresy, the condemned must be interrogated. And medieval interrogation means torture. You're expected to extract confessions using a variety of devices specifically designed to inflict maximum pain without killing the victim too quickly. Because that's important. You need them to confess before they die. The rack is your most common tool. The prisoner is laid on a wooden frame, and their wrists and ankles are tied to rollers. You turn the cranks, slowly stretching their body. At first, it's just uncomfortable. Then agonizing as joints begin to separate, ligaments tear, and bones dislocate. The screaming usually starts around the third or fourth turn. You're trained to read the body, to know how much pressure a person can take before something breaks permanently. Because if you break them too soon, the confession might not count. And then you'll have to start over with a fresh prisoner. Then there's the strappado. The prisoner's hands are tied behind their back, and they're hoisted into the air by a rope attached to their wrists. Their own body weight dislocates their shoulders. Sometimes weights are added to their feet to increase the pain. You control the rope, raising and dropping them, sometimes letting them fall suddenly so the jerk of stopping tears muscles and ligaments. Most people confess within minutes. The thumb screws are simpler, but no less effective. Metal plates tightened around the fingers or thumbs, crushing the bones slowly. The iron boot works the same way but on the leg, with wedges hammered between the boot and the limb until the leg is pulped. The breaking wheel involves tying someone to a large wheel and systematically breaking their limbs with an iron bar, bone by bone. You perform these tortures in a dungeon or torture chamber beneath the courthouse or castle. It's dark, damp, and stinks of blood, sweat, and human waste. The walls are stained, and the sounds echo. Screams, pleas, prayers, curses. They bounce off the stone and fill your ears until you can't hear anything else, even in your sleep. Here's the thing that nobody tells you. You have to be good at this. If you're too brutal, the prisoner dies before confessing, and you're blamed for botching the interrogation. If you're not brutal enough, they don't confess, and you're accused of being soft or even sympathetic to criminals. You have to find the perfect balance between agony and consciousness. You have to become an expert in human suffering. And after each session, you have to clean up, dispose of any body parts that came loose, sharpen and oil your tools, prepare the chamber for the next prisoner. It's janitorial work, but with a level of horror that no amount of experience ever makes routine. By the time you finish a torture session, you're covered in other people's blood and screaming. But you can't show weakness. You can't vomit or hesitate because if you do, the guards will report you, and the magistrate will question your fitness for the job. And being unfit for the job of executioner might mean you become the next person on the rack. So you swallow your horror, wipe your tools clean, and prepare for the main event. Because torture is just the warm-up. The real work, the public execution, is still ahead. And that's where things get truly nightmarish. Public executions are not quiet, private affairs. the medieval equivalent of reality television, sporting events, and public theater all rolled into one gruesome package. And you, the executioner, are the star of the show. Or, more accurately, the villain everyone loves to hate. Executions are scheduled for maximum attendance, usually market days or holidays when the whole town is present. The execution site is typically a raised platform in the town square, specifically built so everyone can see. And everyone does come. Men, women, children, nobles, peasants. Execution day is a public holiday. Street vendors sell food and drink. People place bets on how many axe blows it will take. Children sit on their parents' shoulders for a better view. It's a carnival atmosphere built around watching you kill someone. You begin the day by fetching the condemned from their cell. They've usually been held in deplorable conditions, starved, beaten, and terrified. You have to march them through the streets to the execution site, often in chains, sometimes in a cart called a tumbril. Crowds line the route, jeering, throwing rotten food, spitting, cursing. Some people throw stones. The condemned are pelted with garbage and abuse every step of the way. As the executioner, you're also a target. People throw things at you too. They curse you and make signs against evil as you pass. Children are taught to fear and hate you. You're the monster in their bedtime stories, and you have to walk through this abuse, emotionless, professional, as if it doesn't touch you. When you finally reach the scaffold, the real performance begins. The condemned is usually given a chance to speak, to confess their crimes, to beg for mercy from God or the crowd. Sometimes they proclaim their innocence. Sometimes they curse everyone present. Either way, it doesn't matter. The sentence has been passed. Your job is to carry it out. And here's where your skills matter most, because there are dozens of different execution methods, and each one requires specific techniques. Mess it up, and you'll face the crowd's wrath. Do it well, and they might give you grudging respect, though they'll still hate you tomorrow. The most common method is hanging. Sounds simple, right? Tie a rope, drop them, done. Medieval hanging isn't the quick neck snap you see in movies. The condemned is placed on a ladder or cart. The noose is tied around their neck, and then the support is removed. They drop maybe a few feet and then they strangle. It can take 10 minutes or more for them to die, kicking and thrashing the whole time, their face turning purple, eyes bulging, tongue protruding. It's called dancing the hempen jig because of the way their legs kick. You have to judge the rope length perfectly, too long, and their head might rip off, showering the crowd with blood and horrifying everyone. Too short, and the death takes even longer, and the crowd grows restless or, worse, sympathetic. Sometimes, if you want to be merciful, or if you've been bribed by the family, you can pull on their legs during the hanging to speed up death. But if anyone sees you do it, you could be accused of showing favoritism or corruption. Beheading is considered more honorable, reserved for nobles and knights, and it's harder than it looks. You're using an axe or sword, and you have one chance to get it right. The condemned kneels, places their head on the block, and you swing. A perfect strike severs the head cleanly. You're a professional, but if you miss, if the blade hits the skull at the wrong angle or doesn't go through completely, the condemned doesn't die instantly. Blood sprays everywhere. You have to swing again. Sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5 blows to finally separate the head from the body. Each failed swing is met with jeers, boos, and thrown objects from the crowd. The condemned's family curses you. The other executioners mock you. Your reputation is ruined. There's pressure, immense pressure, to get it right the first time. You spend hours sharpening your axe. You practice on logs, on turnips, anything that helps you judge the angle and force. You pray before each execution, not for the condemned, but for yourself, that your hand is steady and your aim true. Then there are the truly horrific methods, burning at the stake for heretics and witches. The condemned is tied to a wooden pole, surrounded by bundles of wood and kindling. You light the fire, and they burn. The smoke might kill them before the flames if you pile the wood right, which is a mercy. But if the wood is too dry, They burn alive, screaming, their skin blistering and peeling, their hair igniting like a torch. The smell of burning flesh is something you never forget. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your lungs. You taste it for days afterward. Breaking on the wheel is another special horror. The condemned is tied to a large wagon wheel, and you systematically break their limbs with an iron bar, starting with the fingers and toes and working your way up to the major bones. Each strike is deliberate, measured, designed to shatter, but not kill. After all the bones are broken, the body is woven through the spokes of the wheel, which is then raised on a pole and left to die slowly from exposure, shock, and pain. You're expected to check on them periodically to ensure they're still alive, still suffering. Drawing and quartering is reserved for the worst traitors. The condemned is hanged until nearly dead, then cut down and disemboweled while still alive. Their intestines are burned in front of them. Then they're beheaded, and their body is cut into quarters, which are displayed in different parts of the city as a warning. You, as executioner, are responsible for every gruesome step, and you have to do it publicly, methodically, while the crowd watches and cheers. By the end of an execution day, you're drenched in blood. Your clothes are soaked. Your hands are sticky. The crowd disperses, satisfied, heading home to their dinners and families. You're left alone on the scaffold with a headless corpse, or a burnt body, or a pile of dismembered limbs, and you still have work to do. You have to clean up, remove the body or bodies, wash down the scaffold. Sometimes you're required to display the head on a spike as a warning. Sometimes you're told to bury the body quickly and quietly. Sometimes the family is allowed to claim the remains, but often they're too ashamed or too poor, and disposal falls to you. You haul the corpse onto a cart and drag it to the edge of town, to the pit where criminals are dumped. Just a hole in the ground. You strip anything valuable from the body because that's your right as executioner. Then you roll it in and shovel dirt on top. Tomorrow, another execution might be scheduled. The work never really ends. And all the while, you're hated. You walk through town, and people step aside. Mothers pull their children away. Men make signs against evil. Women whisper prayers. You are necessary but never welcomed. You are the hand of justice, but you're treated like a monster. So yes, you probably wouldn't last a day as a medieval executioner, because it's not just the physical work, the blood, and the screams. It's the psychological toll, the knowledge that you're destroying lives, including your own, and there's no escaping it. Once you're an executioner for life. Now let's talk about the social isolation that comes with being an executioner, because the job doesn't end when you leave the scaffold. The stigma follows you everywhere, infecting every aspect of your existence. And it's not just you who suffers. Your entire family is tainted by association. If you have a wife, she's treated as an outcast. Other women won't speak to her. She's barred from markets, church groups, and social gatherings. If she tries to make friends, doors close in her face. Shopkeepers charge her extra, if they serve her at all. Children throw stones at her in the street. She becomes as invisible and untouchable as you are. Your children have it even worse. They're born into the stigma, marked from birth. They're not allowed to attend regular schools. Other children are forbidden from playing with them. They grow up isolated, lonely, understanding from a young age that they're different, that they're somehow bad. And here's the cruelest part. In many places, your son is legally required to follow you into the profession. The role of executioner is often hereditary. Your son doesn't get a choice. His future is already written, condemned to the same isolation and horror that you endure. If you have a daughter, her prospects are even bleaker. No respectable man will marry her. She's the executioner's daughter, tainted by blood and death. Her only options are to marry another outcast, perhaps another executioner's son, or to live alone, unmarried and shunned. Some executioners' daughters end up as prostitutes because that's one of the few professions that will accept them. The irony is bitter. Society considers them too unclean to marry decent men, but not too unclean to use for pleasure. Your family lives in a bubble of isolation. You eat together, alone. You celebrate holidays together, alone. You attend church together, standing in a separate section, far from everyone else, if you're allowed in at all. And every day, you see the pain in your wife's eyes, the confusion in your children's faces, and you know you're the cause. You took this job, or you were born into it, and now everyone you love suffers because of it. The rules governing your life are extensive and humiliating. In some towns, you're required to wear specific colored clothing so people can identify and avoid you. Red, yellow, or striped patterns are common. You're forbidden from entering taverns, bathhouses, or guild halls. You can't join any trade guild, which means you can't learn another profession even if you wanted to escape. You're not allowed to touch public fountains or wells. You have to draw water from designated places, usually from sources no one else wants. You can't sit on public benches. You can't enter most shops. In some places, you're legally required to step aside and lower your eyes when a respectable person passes you on the street. You're treated worse than a leper, because at least lepers inspire pity. You inspire fear and hatred, and yet, you're essential. Without you, the justice system can't function. Criminals can't be punished. The law can't be enforced. Society needs you, but despises you for being needed. It's a paradox that defines your entire existence. You're the necessary evil, the indispensable monster. Some executioners try to cope by leaning into the role. They become deliberately intimidating, wearing dark clothes, refusing to speak, cultivating an aura of menace. If people are going to fear you anyway, why not embrace it? Some develop reputations for cruelty, for taking pleasure in their work. Whether that's true or just a mask to hide their pain, who can say? But the result is the same. More isolation, more hatred, more fear. Others try to be kind, to show that they're human, that they're just doing a job. But kindness is often mistaken for weakness in your profession. And besides, people don't want to see your humanity. It's easier for them to think of you as a monster, as something less than human. Because if they acknowledge that you're just a person doing a terrible job because you have no choice, then they have to confront their own complicity in the system. And that's uncomfortable. You develop coping mechanisms. Some executioners drink heavily, numbing themselves with alcohol. Others become deeply religious, spending hours in private prayer, seeking forgiveness for sins they had no choice but to commit. Some become cold, detached, shutting down emotionally to survive. And some go mad, unable to reconcile the horror of their work with their humanity. Sleep becomes a problem. Not just because of the nightmares, though those are constant, but because lying in the dark, alone with your thoughts, the faces of the people you've killed parade through your mind. You remember their last words, their final expressions, the moment the light left their eyes, left there. You wonder if they were innocent. You wonder if their ghosts will come for you. You wonder if God will forgive you or if you're damned. The stress, the isolation, the physical demands of the job, they all take their toll. Executioners often die young, their bodies worn out, their minds shattered. And when you die, there's no grand funeral, no mourning community. You're buried quickly, quietly, in unconsecrated ground. Your name is forgotten. Your life was a necessary horror, and society is eager to erase all evidence that you ever existed. But before that final release, you wake up each day, put on your marked clothing, and prepare to do it all again, because you have no choice. You're trapped in a cycle of violence, isolation, and despair, and the only escape is death. Yours or someone else's. Let's discuss the actual tools of your trade, because being an executioner requires a workshop full of specialized equipment, each item designed for a specific type of death or torture, and you're responsible for maintaining every single piece. Your tools must be sharp, clean, and ready at a moment's notice. A dull blade or broken rope could mean the difference between a quick death and a prolonged nightmare. And guess who gets blamed when things go wrong? The axe is your primary instrument for beheadings, but it's not just any axe. It's heavier than a woodsman's axe, with a broader blade designed to sever bone and tissue in a single stroke. You sharpen it, obsessively, spending hours with a whetstone, testing the edge against wood and straw. The weight and balance must be perfect because you get one swing, one chance to do it right. You practice your stance, your grip, the arc of the swing. You visualize the strike over and over because when the moment comes, muscle memory has to take over. Hesitation means failure. Some executioners prefer a sword for beheadings, especially when executing nobles who can pay for a more honorable death. A sharp, well-balanced executioner's sword, wielded by a skilled hand, can remove a head so cleanly that witnesses report the eyes still blinking after the head hits the ground. But if you miss, if the blade hits at the wrong angle or lacks the force to cut through the spine, created a screaming, thrashing horror show. The condemned suffers, the crowd riots, and your reputation is destroyed. Then there's the rope for hangings. You'd think rope is rope, but you'd be wrong. The rope must be strong enough to hold a struggling body, but flexible enough to tie a proper noose. You have to know exactly how much rope to use, how to tie the knot, where to place it on the neck. Too tight, and the noose strangles slowly. Too loose, and it slips. The length of the drop matters too. You're constantly calculating weight, height, rope strength. It's a morbid mathematics that you've become an expert in. After each hanging, you keep the rope, because, as mentioned earlier, people believe hangman's rope has magical properties. You can sell it by the inch to desperate, superstitious buyers. It's a grim side business, but it supplements your income. Some executioners braid the rope into bracelets or charms, maximizing profit. You try not to think about what buyers do with these items. Your torture chamber, if you're employed by a castle or wealthy town, is stocked with nightmare devices. The rack, as discussed, is a large wooden frame with rollers and ropes. You're responsible for oiling the mechanisms, ensuring the rollers turn smoothly. The strappado requires a sturdy ceiling beam and strong rope. The wheel, used for breaking bones, must be maintained. The wood, checked for cracks. The Iron Maiden, if your town has one, needs its hinges oiled and spikes sharpened. These aren't museum pieces. They're working tools that you use regularly. You also have a collection of smaller implements. Thumbscrews, pincers, branding irons, whips, knives. Each has a specific purpose. The pincers pull out fingernails or tear flesh. The branding irons mark criminals permanently, scarring them for life. The whips are used for public floggings, which are also your responsibility. You're expected to deliver the exact number of lashes ordered, no more, no less, with enough force to punish, but not kill. Unless, of course, the sentence is flogging to death, in which case you adjust accordingly. Maintaining these tools is a daily chore. Blood and rust are constant problems. After each use, you must clean every surface, oil every joint, sharpen every blade. You work in your isolated home or in a small shed near the execution grounds, alone, surrounded by instruments of death. It's like being a craftsman, but instead of creating beautiful objects, you're perfecting tools of suffering. And you have to be creative. Sometimes the magistrate orders a punishment you've never performed before. Perhaps a criminal is sentenced to be roasted slowly over a fire, or to have molten lead poured down their throat, or to be buried alive. These aren't standard procedures, so you have to figure out the logistics. How do you construct a slow roasting apparatus? How do you heat lead to the right temperature without it cooling too quickly? How do you ensure a buried person suffocates at the right pace? It's problem solving, but the problems are horrifying. You also have to manage the execution site itself. The scaffold must be sturdy, the platform high enough for visibility, the trap door, if there is one, functional. You inspect it before every execution, checking for loose boards, weak ropes, anything that could go wrong. Because if the scaffold collapses during an execution, guess who's blamed? Then there's the cleanup. After an execution, especially a messy one like a beheading or disembowelment, the scaffold is covered in blood and other fluids. You're responsible for scrubbing it down, hauling away the remains, and preparing the site for the next use. You work alone, usually at night, because even the cleanup is considered too disturbing for public viewing. You scrub blood from wood, gather severed body parts, and try not to think about the fact that this was a person, a living, breathing human being, just hours ago. Your tools also have symbolic weight. In some towns, the executioner's sword is ceremonially broken after a certain number of executions and buried with full ritual. In others, the axe is passed down through generations, becoming a grim family heirloom. You're expected to treat these tools with a strange mixture of respect and detachment. They're sacred instruments of justice, but they're also just metal and wood. The contradiction is exhausting, and you can never forget, not even for a moment, that these tools are extensions of your own hands. When you behead someone, it's not the axe that's responsible. When you hang someone, it's not the rope. Society might hide behind laws and justice, but you're the one who actually does the killing. You're the one covered in blood. You're the one who can't wash the stains away, no matter how hard you scrub. Now, let's talk about the executions that go wrong. Because they do go wrong more often than you'd think. And when they do, it's a nightmare for everyone involved, but especially for you. You're preparing for a standard beheading. The condemned is a thief, sentenced to lose his head. You've sharpened your axe, checked the block, and practiced your swing. The crowd gathers, the prisoner is led out, and you take your position. You raise the axe, aim carefully, and bring it down with all your strength. But something goes wrong. Maybe your aim is slightly off. Maybe the condemned flinched at the last second. Maybe your axe hit a particularly thick part of the spine. Instead of a clean cut, the blade buries itself in the neck, but doesn't sever it. The condemned screams. A horrible, wet, gurgling scream. Blood sprays everywhere. The crowd gasps, then starts shouting. You have to pull the axe free, which makes a sickening sound, and swing again. Each blow is worse than the last. By the time you finally separate the head from the body, you've struck 5 or 6 times. The block is drenched in blood. The crowd is horrified and angry, and you know your reputation has just been shattered. Or consider a botched hanging. You've calculated the rope length carefully, but the condemned is lighter than you estimated. Instead of a quick drop and snap, they dangle, slowly strangling. Their face turns purple, then blue. Their legs kick frantically, a dance of death that seems to go on forever. The crowd grows restless. Some people start to feel sympathy for the condemned. Others jeer at you, calling you incompetent. You stand there, helpless, waiting for it to be over. Finally, mercifully, the kicking stops. But the damage to your reputation is done. Burning at the stake can also go horribly wrong. If the wood is damp or poorly arranged, the fire smolders instead of burning hot. The condemned isn't killed quickly by smoke inhalation. Instead, they burn slowly, screaming, begging for mercy that you can't provide. The smell of burning flesh fills the square. People in the crowd start to vomit. Some leave in disgust, but you have to stand there, watching, because it's your responsibility to see it through to the end. You can't add more wood or stoke the fire without permission, so you just wait, enduring the screams until finally, after what feels like hours, the condemned falls silent. Sometimes the condemned themselves make it harder. They resist, fighting against their restraints, making it nearly impossible to position them correctly. Or they plead, crying and begging, which can turn the crowd sympathetic. If the crowd decides the condemned is innocent or the punishment too harsh, they can riot. And guess who they attack first? Not the judge who passed the sentence, not the guards who arrested the criminal, the visible face of the law. You've heard stories of executioners being beaten, even killed by angry mobs after a botched execution. In some towns, if an execution goes badly, the executioner is fined or even imprisoned. The logic is cruel. You're responsible for carrying out the law efficiently, and failure is punishable. It doesn't matter that you're human, that accidents happen, that sometimes the condemned's body doesn't cooperate. You're expected to be perfect, every time. And then there are the political executions, the ones where the condemned is actually innocent, or at least not guilty of the crime they're accused of. Maybe they're on the wrong side of a power struggle. Maybe someone wanted them out of the way. But the sentence has been passed, and you have to carry it out. You look into their eyes, see their fear and confusion, and you know you're killing an innocent person. Refuse, and you'll be executed yourself. So, you do your job, and another piece of your soul dies with them. Some executioners develop rituals to cope with the horror. Prayers before each execution, asking God for forgiveness. Others drink heavily beforehand, numbing themselves with alcohol. Some become cold and detached, viewing the condemned as already dead, just waiting for the formality of execution. But no matter what coping mechanism you develop, the botched executions haunt you. The faces, the screams, the blood, they stay with you, replaying in your mind, especially in the dark hours before dawn. You start having nightmares. In your dreams, you're the one on the scaffold. You're the one kneeling at the block, feeling the cold steel on your neck. Or you're hanging, slowly strangling, your legs kicking uselessly. Or you're burning, feeling your skin blister and peel. You wake up screaming, covered in sweat, and for a moment, you can't remember if you're the executioner or the condemned. Sometimes, you're not sure there's a difference. Let's talk about the moments when you're forced to execute people you know. Because in a small medieval town, it's inevitable. The community is tight-knit, even if you're excluded from most of it. You still recognize faces, hear names, know stories, and sometimes, the person you're ordered to execute is someone you've seen around town, someone you've spoken to, someone who in another life might have been a friend. Maybe it's the baker who sold you bread, back before you became untouchable. He's been accused of heresy, of speaking against the church. The evidence is flimsy, probably coerced, but the sentence is burning at the stake. You have to gather the wood, build the pyre, tie him to the stake, and light the fire. He looks at you as you do it, and you see recognition in his eyes. He knows who you are. He knows you're just doing your job. But there's also accusation there. A silent question. How can you do this? Or perhaps it's a woman accused of witchcraft. She was kind once, gave your wife herbal remedies when she was sick. But someone accused her, maybe out of spite, maybe because they wanted her land. She's been tortured into confessing to impossible crimes, flying on broomsticks, consorting with demons, cursing her neighbors. You know it's nonsense. Everyone knows it's nonsense. But the confession was extracted, and the sentence is death by burning. You have to tie her to the stake, and as you do, she looks at you with a mixture of fear and pity, because she knows that after this, you'll have to live with what you've done. Sometimes it's even worse. Sometimes it's a child. Medieval justice doesn't always distinguish between adults and children when it comes to serious crimes. A boy accused of theft, sentenced to hanging. He's maybe 12 years old, skinny, terrified. You have to place the noose around his small neck, adjust the rope, and then drop him. The crowd is unusually quiet during these executions. Even the most bloodthirsty spectators are uncomfortable watching a child die. But the law is the law, and you're the instrument of the law. And afterward, you can't stop seeing his face, can't stop hearing his final choked cries. There's a special kind of horror in executing someone you know. It personalizes the act, strips away the ability to view the condemned as just a criminal, just a job. They become human again, with histories and relationships and futures that you're ending. And you can't unhear their voices, can't unsee their faces. They haunt you in ways that anonymous executions don't. And then, there's the worst scenario, when you're ordered to execute a family member. It's rare, but it happens. In some places, the executioner's son is legally obligated to execute his father if the father is condemned. It's a test of loyalty to the state, a brutal assertion that the law stands above all, even family. Raising your son, teaching him the trade, and knowing that one day, if you're accused of a crime, he might be the one to kill you. Or worse, being forced to execute your own child. There are records of this happening. An executioner's son accused of a crime, and the father ordered to carry out the execution. Some fathers refuse, accepting their own death rather than kill their child. Others go through with it, broken and destroyed by the act, but alive. There's no right choice, no good outcome. It's a nightmare scenario that demonstrates just how dehumanizing and cruel the profession truly is. Even if you're not executing family, you're often executing people from your own social class. Other outcasts, criminals, poor people who stole to survive. You see yourself in them. You understand their desperation, their lack of options, and you know that. But for a twist of fate, you could be the one on the scaffold instead of beside it. That knowledge eats at you, gnaws at your sense of self. A servant of justice? A victim of circumstance? The lines blur until you can't tell anymore. Can't. Some executioners cope by dehumanizing the condemned, refusing to learn their names, avoiding eye contact, thinking of them as already dead. It's a defense mechanism, a way to create emotional distance. But it doesn't always work, because even if you don't learn their names, you still see their humanity. You still hear their final words, see their tears, feel their bodies shake with fear. And you can't unhear, unsee, or unfeel that. You start to wonder, who is more damned, the person being executed or the person doing the executing? The condemned dies once and is free. But you have to live with the weight of every life you've taken, carrying those deaths with you for the rest of your existence. And there's no absolution, no forgiveness. The church offers prayers, but they feel hollow. God might forgive you, but can you forgive yourself? The answer, more often than not, is no. Let's discuss the strange, grim economy that surrounds executions. Because death, in medieval times, is not just a legal matter or a moral issue. It's also a business. And as the executioner, you're at the center of a macabre marketplace where every part of the condemned and the execution itself has monetary value. First, there's the execution fee. The town or lord pays you a set amount for each execution. It's usually not much, barely enough to cover basic living expenses, but it's supplemented by various side earnings that make the job financially viable, if morally reprehensible. The most profitable is the right of the executioner to claim the condemned's clothing and possessions. When someone is executed, everything they're wearing belongs to you. Clothes, shoes, belts, jewelry, it's all yours. For a wealthy condemned person, this can be a significant windfall. Their fine cloak, their leather boots, their rings. You strip it all and sell it. For a poor criminal, you might get a ragged tunic and worn-out shoes. Hardly worth the effort, but it's still yours by right. Then there's the body itself. As mentioned, body parts of the executed are believed to have magical or medicinal properties. The fat from a hanged man, called corpse fat, or hangman's grease, is thought to cure various ailments and is used in folk magic. You render it from the bodies and sell it by the ounce. A severed hand, particularly from a hanged thief, is considered a powerful charm for criminals. A hand of glory that supposedly grants invisibility, or opens locks. You can charge a premium for these. The blood of the executed is also valuable. It's believed to cure epilepsy, skin conditions, and other diseases. You collect it in vials and sell it to desperate people, usually at night, in secret transactions. The rope used in a hanging, as discussed, is cut into pieces and sold as a cure for headaches, and as a good luck charm. Every part of the death trade has a buyer. Some executioners even charge for mercy, a quick death versus a slow one. If the family of the condemned can pay, you'll ensure the execution is swift and as painless as possible. A sharp axe, a well-placed blow, a properly tied noose. If they can't pay, well, you're not deliberately cruel, but you might not go out of your way to be efficient either. This creates a horrible moral economy where the wealthy can buy a better death, while the poor suffer. There's also the matter of torture fees. When you're ordered to torture someone for a confession, you're paid per session. More torture sessions mean more money. There's an inherent conflict of interest here. If the prisoner confesses quickly, you earn less. If they hold out, if you have to use multiple methods over several days, you earn more. The system incentivizes prolonged suffering, and you're caught in the middle, trying to balance your financial needs with your conscience. Another income source is performing punishments that aren't executions. Floggings, brandings, ear cropping, nose slitting, all of these fall under your purview, and all come with fees. A public flogging might earn you a few coins. Branding a criminal with a hot iron might pay a bit more. These punishments are meant to humiliate and mark criminals for life, and you're the one who inflicts them. The screams, the smell of burning flesh, the blood, it all becomes routine, just another day's work. You also have unofficial income from blackmail and extortion. People fear you, and fear can be profitable. If someone crosses you, if a merchant refuses to serve you, you might hint that false accusations could be made, that you have the ear of certain officials. It's dirty, it's unethical, but when you're living on the margins, morality becomes a luxury. Some executioners become local crime bosses of a sort, using their fearsome reputation and connections to the law to extract money from those even more desperate than themselves. But all of this income comes at a cost. Every coin you earn is tainted with blood. Your wealth, such as it is built on suffering and death. You can't spend your money in decent establishments, can't flaunt it, because doing so would invite questions and resentment. You hoard your earnings, living modestly, saving for a future that might never come, because deep down, you know that no amount of money can buy back your humanity, your reputation, or your soul. And the final bitter irony: when you die, all of your accumulated wealth often goes unclaimed. Your children, if they inherit the profession, might take it. But if you have no heirs, or if your family wants nothing to do with your blood money, it's often seized by the state or the church. You've spent your life earning tainted coins, and in the end, you can't even pass them on. Your legacy is not wealth, but horror. Not prosperity, but a name whispered in fear and disgust. Let's talk about the psychological unraveling that happens when you've been an executioner for years. Because the human mind wasn't designed to handle this level of sustained horror. And eventually, something breaks. At first, you're horrified by what you do. Each execution weighs on you. Each tortured scream echoes in your mind. You lose sleep. You lose appetite. You lose any sense of normalcy. But humans are adaptable creatures, for better or worse. Over time, the horror becomes routine. You stop flinching at the sight of blood. You stop hearing the screams as human sounds. They become background noise like birdsong or rain. You develop a professional detachment, viewing each execution as just a task to be completed, like chopping wood or mending a fence. This detachment is necessary for survival. If you felt the full weight of every life you took, you'd go mad immediately. So you build walls in your mind, compartmentalizing the horror, separating your identity as an executioner from your identity as a person. But these walls are fragile, and they leak. The horror seeps through, poisoning everything. Maybe you become cold, emotionless, unable to feel much of anything. Your wife complains that you're distant, that you don't laugh anymore, that you barely speak. You go through the motions of life, but you're not really present. You're somewhere else, somewhere dark and isolated, even when you're physically at home. Or maybe you go the other direction. You become volatile, prone to sudden rages over minor things. A spilled cup of water sends you into a fury. A child's innocent question makes you shout. You're wound so tight, holding in so much that the pressure has to escape somehow. Your family learns to walk on eggshells around you, never knowing what might set you off. Some executioners turn to alcohol, as mentioned. Drinking numbs the pain, blurs the memories, makes it easier to sleep. But alcohol is a cruel mistress. You need more and more to achieve the same effect. You start drinking before executions, during executions, after executions. You're drunk more often than sober. And when you're drunk, you're sloppy. And mistakes in your profession are catastrophic. Others turn to religion with a fervor that borders on obsession. You pray constantly, begging God for forgiveness, trying to cleanse yourself of the blood on your hands. You might flagellate yourself, physically punishing your body as penance for your sins. You memorize prayers, recite them over and over, hoping that sheer volume of devotion will somehow save your soul. But deep down, you fear it's not enough, that you're damned no matter how much you pray. Some executioners develop a dark, twisted sense of humor. Gallows humor, literally. You joke about death, make puns about the condemned, laugh at the absurdity of your life. It's a coping mechanism, a way to release tension and make the horror bearable. But it also further isolates you, because normal people are horrified by your jokes. They don't understand that you're not heartless. You're just broken in a way they can't comprehend. And then there are the hallucinations. After years of executions, you start seeing the dead. Not metaphorically, literally. You wake up at night and see a figure standing in the corner of your room, a headless man or a woman with burns covering her body. You're working alone in your shed, and you hear whispers, voices that aren't there. You walk through town, and you see faces in the crowd, faces of people you've executed, staring at you accusingly. You know it's your mind breaking, but knowing doesn't make it stop. You become convinced that people are plotting against you, that you're going to be arrested and executed yourself, that divine retribution is coming. You start seeing threats everywhere, trusting no one, not even your family. You lock your doors obsessively, check your tools constantly, always on edge, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Some executioners eventually suicide. The weight becomes too much, the isolation too complete, the horror too overwhelming. They hang themselves, ironically using the same methods they used on others. Or they drink poison, or slash their wrists, or walk into the river with stones in their pockets. Death, the thing they've been inflicting on others for years, becomes their only escape. But even in death, there's no peace, because as mentioned, you're often buried in unconsecrated ground, denied a proper Christian burial. Your soul, already burdened with countless deaths, is believed to be beyond salvation. And the living quickly forget you, eager to erase any memory of the monster who lived among them. And if you don't suicide, if you somehow endure until old age, you become a shell of a person, ancient, haunted, barely human. You shuffle through your final years, alone, speaking to ghosts, reliving executions in your mind. When you finally die, it's a mercy. But the damage you've done, to yourself and others, remains. Your life was a tragedy, a slow-motion descent into horror, and there was never any way out. Now, let's talk about the rare moments of defiance when executioners refuse to do their job. Because it does happen, though not often, and the consequences are severe. Imagine you're ordered to execute a child, a girl accused of witchcraft. She's maybe 10 years old, terrified, crying for her mother. Every instinct you have screams that this is wrong, that she's innocent, that killing her is a moral crime. And for once, you decide to listen to that instinct. You tell the magistrate that you won't do it, that you can't do it, that there are lines even you won't cross. What happens next depends on the town, the Lord, and the political climate. In some cases, your refusal is seen as a betrayal of duty. You're arrested, imprisoned, and likely executed yourself. The state can't tolerate an executioner who picks and chooses which sentences to carry out. If you refuse once, you might refuse again, and that undermines the entire justice system. So, you're made an example of, killed publicly, a warning to anyone else who might think of defying the law. In other cases, you might be allowed to resign, but only if a replacement can be found. And finding someone willing to become an executioner is difficult. Who volunteers for a job that guarantees social death, isolation, and psychological torment? Sometimes a convicted criminal is given a choice: become the executioner or be executed. It's a cruel bargain, but some take it, choosing life, even a horrific life, over death. But let's say your refusal is accepted and you're allowed to walk away. Everyone knows you were the executioner. The stigma doesn't vanish just because you quit. You're still untouchable, still feared and hated. And now you have no income, no skills that translate to any other profession. You're unemployable, destitute, and still cursed by your past. Some former executioners become beggars, living on the streets, surviving on charity that rarely comes. Others flee to other towns, trying to start over under a new name. But the past has a way of catching up. Someone recognizes you, or word spreads, and suddenly you're the executioner again, shunned and despised even though you're no longer practicing the trade. There are stories of executioners who tried to atone for their sins. One famous tale tells of an executioner who spent his final years building a chapel, stone by stone, with his own hands, praying for forgiveness with each block he laid. Another story speaks of an executioner who became a hermit, living in isolation, fasting and praying, trying to cleanse his soul before death. Whether these acts of penance were effective, whether God forgave them, is a matter of faith. But the stories suggest that the need for redemption was overwhelming, a desperate attempt to find meaning and absolution in a life defined by death. In rare cases, an executioner might be pardoned and granted a new life. Perhaps a lord takes pity, or a change in regime brings new opportunities. But even then, the psychological scars remain. You can change your name, your location, your profession, but you can't change your memories. The faces of the condemned stay with you. The weight of their deaths never lifts. You might live a quiet life, but you're never truly free. Most executioners, though, never get the chance to refuse or resign. They're trapped from the moment they take the job, or from the moment they're born into the profession. They endure because they have no choice, carrying out their grim duties until their bodies or minds give out. And when they finally die, they leave behind no legacy, no monument, no memory, just a vague sense of unease in the community, a collective relief that the monster is gone, and a silent prayer that whoever takes his place is just as efficient and just as forgettable. Let's briefly touch on the few strange advantages of being an executioner, because as horrific as the job is, there are moments, rare, fleeting moments, when it provides something that other professions don't. These aren't enough to make the job worthwhile, not by a long shot, but they exist, and they deserve acknowledgement. First, there's job security. In a medieval world, where most people live hand to mouth, where famine and disease can wipe out entire families, you at least have a guaranteed income. As long as there are criminals, there's work. As long as the law exists, you're needed. It's not much, but it's something. You know that. Barring a refusal to do your duty, you won't starve. Your family won't starve. That's more than many can say. Second, there's a strange kind of power. You're feared, yes, but fear is a form of power. People step aside when you walk by. They don't meet your eyes, but they acknowledge your presence. In a world where peasants are constantly pushed around, where most people have no control over their lives, you have a measure of agency. It's a dark, twisted power, but it's power nonetheless. Third, you have access to the inner workings of the law. You see how justice is administered, how decisions are made, how the powerful manipulate the system. This knowledge gives you insight that most people lack. You understand that the law isn't some divine, impartial force. It's a tool used by those in power to maintain control. And while this knowledge is disillusioning, it's also enlightening. You see the world as it truly is, stripped of comforting illusions. Fourth, and this is perhaps the strangest advantage, you develop a kind of resilience. Normal people crumble under the weight of death and horror. You've been immersed in it, drowned in it, and somehow you've survived. You've developed a toughness, a hardness, that makes you nearly unbreakable in certain ways. Physical pain doesn't bother you much. Threats don't scare you. You've seen and done things that would drive most people mad, and you're still standing. That resilience, that ability to endure the unendurable, is a skill. even if it's one you never wanted to develop. And finally, there's a grim kind of freedom. You're already at the bottom of society. You can't fall any further. In a world obsessed with reputation and status, you have none. And that means you also have nothing to lose. You can speak truths that others can't, because who cares what the executioner thinks? You can observe humanity from the outside, unencumbered by social niceties or the need to fit in. It's a lonely freedom, but it's freedom nonetheless. But these advantages are cold comfort. They're scraps thrown to a starving man, barely enough to sustain life, nowhere near enough to make life worth living. The job still destroys you, slowly and thoroughly. The psychological damage, the social isolation, the moral weight, they outweigh any benefits 1,000 times over. So yes, there are advantages, but they're like finding a few coins in the ruins of your burned-down house. Technically valuable, but utterly insignificant compared to what you've lost. Let's talk about the end. Because every executioner's story ends, one way or another. Whether you die in office, retire, or break and run, the finale is almost always grim. Most executioners die relatively young, worn out by the stress, the violence, and the harsh living conditions. Your body takes a beating from the physical labor, swinging axes, handling bodies, maintaining torture devices. Your mind takes an even worse beating from the psychological horror. Heart attacks, strokes, stress-related illnesses, they claim executioners at a higher rate than almost any other profession. When you die, there's no public mourning. There's no grand funeral with weeping mourners and eloquent eulogies. If you're lucky, your family buries you quietly, perhaps with a priest willing to say a few prayers. If you're unlucky, you're buried in unconsecrated ground, in a mass grave with criminals and outcasts. Your grave is unmarked, or marked with a simple stone bearing no name, no dates, no acknowledgement that you ever lived. The community breathes a sigh of relief. Children are told that the executioner is dead, and they feel safer, even though they never really understood what you did or why. Adults toast to your passing in taverns, glad to have that shadow removed from their town. Within a generation, maybe two, you're completely forgotten. Your name isn't passed down. Your story isn't told. You're erased from history as thoroughly as if you never existed. If you have children who inherit the profession, the cycle continues. Your son becomes the next executioner, taking on the same burdens, the same isolation, the same horror. He lives your life, makes your choices, walks your path, and when he dies, he too is forgotten, buried in unmarked ground, erased. The profession is a curse that spans generations, a hereditary damnation that only ends when the line dies out. Some executioners try to leave something behind, some proof that they existed, that they mattered. They carve their initials into the execution scaffold or into the walls of their homes. They write diaries, secret journals detailing their work, their thoughts, their fears. Most of these writings are destroyed after their death, burned by family members ashamed of their contents. But a few survive, hidden in attics or archives, discovered centuries later by historians. These diaries are heartbreaking, revealing the humanity of men forced into inhuman roles, documenting their slow descent into despair. In those rare writings, you find confessions. I have killed 37 souls. God forgive me. I dream of their faces every night. There's no peace, not even in sleep. I did what I was ordered to do, but I know I am damned. These words, written by men who have been dead for centuries, echo across time. They're proof that executioners were human, that they suffered, that they wanted redemption. But they're also proof that redemption never came, not in life, and perhaps not even in death. The medieval world relied on executioners, needed them to function, to maintain order, but it also despised them, cast them out, and erased them. It's a contradiction that defines the profession, essential but loathed, necessary but cursed. You're the price society pays for justice, the human sacrifice made to keep the law intact. And when you die, society moves on, unburdened, while you remain forever bound to the blood on your hands. So, here we are, at the end of your first, and probably only, day as a medieval executioner. You're covered in blood, exhausted, psychologically shattered, and completely isolated. The faces of the dead haunt your thoughts. The weight of what you've done presses down on you like a physical force. And tomorrow, you'll have to do it all again. You probably wouldn't last a day as a medieval executioner, not because you lack the physical strength, though swinging an axe is harder than it looks, not because you lack the stomach for it, though the blood and screams are overwhelming. You wouldn't last because the job destroys everything that makes you human. It strips away your identity, your social connections, your moral compass. It turns you into a tool, a weapon, a thing, rather than a person. Medieval executioners weren't monsters. They were men, ordinary men, forced into extraordinary horror by circumstance, law, or birth. They suffered immensely, carrying burdens that no one should have to carry. They were essential to the functioning of medieval justice, yet they were reviled for doing the very work society demanded of them. It's one of history's cruelest ironies. So tonight, as you lie in your comfortable bed in your safe home, surrounded by people who love you and a society that values you, spare a thought for the medieval executioner, the man who woke before dawn to do a job that would break most people in hours, the man who carried death with him wherever he went, unable to wash it away, the man who, despite everything, kept going, day after day, because he had no choice, and be grateful, deeply grateful, that you'll never have to walk in his blood-soaked shoes, because you probably wouldn't last a day, because we've only scratched the surface of what it means to be a medieval executioner. There are layers of horror we haven't explored, aspects of the job we haven't examined, and psychological depths we haven't plumbed. So, settle in, because we're going to spend more time in this nightmare, understanding exactly why this profession was one of the most devastating in human history. Let's talk about the training. How does one become an executioner? It's not like there's a school, a guild, or an apprenticeship program advertised in the town square. No young boy dreams of growing up to be an executioner. No parent proudly announces that their son is training for the profession. So how does it happen? Most commonly, as mentioned, it's hereditary. You're born to an executioner. And from childhood, you know your fate. Your father takes you to the scaffold when you're young, maybe 6 or 7 years old. At first, you just watch. You see him sharpen his tools, prepare the site, interact with guards and officials. You don't understand what's happening, not fully, but you sense the weight, the fear, the isolation. As you grow older, your father begins teaching you directly. He shows you how to maintain the axe, how to judge the sharpness of the blade, how to feel the balance and weight. He teaches you the anatomy of the human neck, pointing out where the vertebrae are, where the blade should strike for a clean cut. It's disturbing knowledge for a child, but you're not allowed to be squeamish. Weakness will get you killed in this profession, one way or another. By the time you're a teenager, you're assisting with executions. You help restrain the condemned, prepare the scaffold, manage the crowd. You're learning the performance aspect of the job because that's what it is, a performance. The crowd expects certain things, and delivering them correctly can mean the difference between a smooth execution and a riot. Your first solo execution is terrifying. Your father watches from the crowd, his face impassive, but you know he's judging every move. The condemned is a petty thief, sentenced to hanging. Your hands shake as you tie the noose. You're worried you'll mess up the knot, that the rope will slip, that the man will suffer unnecessarily. But you go through the motions, step by step, exactly as your father taught you. The condemned drops. The rope goes taut, and he hangs there kicking, slowly strangling. It takes almost 10 minutes for him to die. The crowd is restless, but not angry. You've done an acceptable job. You've passed the test. But inside, you're screaming. You've just killed a man. You're 14 years old, and you've taken a human life. That night, you can't eat. You see the man's face, hear his choking gasps, feel the rope in your hands. Your father tells you it gets easier. You don't believe him, but you also don't have a choice. This is your life now. If you're not born into the profession, you might become an executioner as punishment for your own crimes. In some regions, convicted criminals are given a choice: death or become the executioner. It's a cruel bargain. Live, but live as an outcast, hated and feared, doing work that will destroy your soul, or die now, quickly, and escape the horror. Others, clinging to life, choose the executioner's path and regret it for the rest of their days. There's also the rare case of volunteers. Desperate men with no other options, perhaps fleeing from debts or crimes, might approach the town council and offer to take the job. They think it's just a job, just work. They don't understand the psychological and social cost. Most don't last long. The ones who do become hard, bitter men, shells of who they once were. Training also involves learning the regional variations of execution methods. Different towns have different preferences. Some favor hanging, others beheading. Some use burning at the stake for certain crimes, others use drowning. You have to learn them all because you never know what sentence will be passed. You have to be versatile, a master of death in all its forms. And it's not just the physical techniques. You're also trained in reading the condemned, how to tell if they're going to fight or submit, how to manage a crowd that's turning sympathetic or hostile, how to deal with nobles who are being executed and expect a certain level of respect, even at the end. These are subtle skills, learned through experience and observation. Your father shares his knowledge, hard-won over decades, and you absorb it, knowing that one day you'll pass it on to your own son, continuing the cursed cycle. Let's explore the relationship between the executioner and the condemned in their final hours. Because contrary to popular belief, you often interact with the people you're going to kill. And these interactions are some of the most psychologically damaging aspects of the job. Sometimes the condemned is brought to you days before the execution. Perhaps they need to be tortured for a confession, or perhaps they're simply being held until the execution date. You might be responsible for guarding them, feeding them, even speaking with them. You become their only human contact in their final days. And despite the horror of your role, some of them talk to you. They tell you their stories. The thief explains that he stole bread to feed his starving children. The woman accused of witchcraft swears she's innocent, that her neighbor made false accusations out of spite. The political prisoner speaks of betrayal, of how he was loyal, but was framed by rivals. You listen, because what else are you going to do? They're going to die, and they need to talk, to be heard, to have their humanity acknowledged one last time. And here's the cruelest part. You start to see them as people, not just criminals, not just condemned, but human beings with families, histories, fears, and hopes. The thief shows you a small wooden toy he carved for his daughter. The accused witch hums a lullaby she used to sing to her children. The political prisoner recites poetry, beautiful verses that reveal an educated, thoughtful mind. They're not monsters. They're just people, and you're going to kill them. Some of them beg for mercy. Even though they know you can't grant it, they plead, offering you money, promises, anything if you'll just let them go. You have to refuse because you have no power to free them. Your only power is to end their lives. Others accept their fate with quiet dignity, asking only that you make it quick, that you don't let them suffer. You promise to do your best, knowing that sometimes, despite your skill, things go wrong. A few become defiant, cursing you, spitting at you, calling you every foul name they can think of. They tell you you're damned, that God will punish you, that you're worse than they ever were. And maybe they're right. Maybe you are damned. Maybe what you do is worse than any crime they committed, but you still have to do it. On the day of the execution, you often have to escort them from the cell to the scaffold. It's a long walk, and they know where it ends. Some walk with dignity, heads held high, refusing to give the crowd the satisfaction of seeing them broken. Others have to be dragged, screaming and fighting, terror overwhelming any sense of pride. You're strong enough to handle them, but it's exhausting, both physically and emotionally. You remember a young man, maybe 20 years old, convicted of murder. He killed a man in a fight, a drunken brawl that went too far. He didn't mean to kill anyone. It was an accident, but the law doesn't care about intent. On the walk to the scaffold, he started crying. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet, hopeless tears. He whispered that he was scared, that he didn't want to die. You can't offer absolution or comfort. You're the instrument of his death. So you said nothing, just walked beside him, and tried to ignore the way your heart twisted. When you finally place the noose around his neck or position his head on the block, sometimes they look at you, and in their eyes, you see everything. Fear, anger, resignation, and sometimes, strangely, understanding. They know you're just doing a job. They know you're trapped in this role just as they're trapped in theirs. In that moment, executioner and condemned are united in their shared humanity, however briefly. Then you pull the lever or swing the axe, and it's over. And you're left standing there, alone, with blood on your hands and another face added to the collection, haunting your dreams. These interactions change you. They make it impossible to view the condemned as faceless criminals. They force you to confront the humanity of the people you kill. And that makes the job infinitely harder. Because it's one thing to kill a monster, a concept, an abstraction. It's another thing entirely to kill a person who showed you a toy carved for his daughter, who hummed a lullaby, who cried and admitted he was scared. Those are the deaths that haunt you the most, the ones you can never forget, the ones that slowly, inexorably destroy your soul. Let's discuss the variety of execution methods in more detail, because medieval justice was nothing if not creative in its cruelty. Each method had its own techniques, its own challenges, and its own particular horror. And as the executioner, you had to master them all. We've covered hanging and beheading, the most common methods, but there were so many others, each designed to fit the crime or to send a specific message. Let's start with drowning. In some regions, particularly for women convicted of certain crimes, drowning was the preferred method. The condemned was tied in a sack, sometimes with a cat, a dog, a snake, and a rooster, animals symbolizing various sins, and thrown into a river or lake. As the executioner, you're responsible for securing the condemned in the sack, ensuring it's weighted properly so it sinks, and then tossing it into the water. You watch as the sack disappears beneath the surface, knowing that inside, the person is thrashing, panicking, lungs burning, water filling their mouth and nose. It takes several minutes for them to drown. You can't see it happening, which is somehow worse. Your imagination fills in the details, and they're horrific. Then there's boiling. Rare, but it happened. The condemned is lowered into a large cauldron of boiling water or oil. The screaming is immediate and unbearable. Their skin blisters and peels within seconds. The smell of cooking flesh fills the air. Spectators often vomit or faint. You have to stand there, controlling the rope or mechanism that lowers them, ensuring they're fully submerged. It's one of the most brutal methods, reserved for the most hated criminals, like poisoners. The entire process can take 15 minutes or more, depending on how deep they're submerged. It's torture disguised as execution, and you're the one making it happen. Sawing is another method, though thankfully rare. The condemned is hung upside down, and you use a large saw to cut them in half, starting from the groin. The upside-down position keeps blood in the brain, so they remain conscious longer. It's slow, agonizing, and utterly barbaric. Few executioners are ever required to perform this method, but those who do are scarred for life. The sound alone, the sawing through bone, the screams, is enough to drive a person mad. Then there's the breaking wheel we discussed, but let's go deeper. The condemned is tied to a wheel, limbs spread. You use an iron bar to break each bone methodically. You start with the fingers, then the hands, wrists, forearms, elbows, upper arms. Then you move to the legs, toes, feet, ankles, shins, knees, thighs, Each strike must be precise, hard enough to shatter bone but not kill. The condemned is conscious through most of it, screaming with each blow. The crowd counts the strikes, turning it into a grotesque sport. After all, the limbs are broken. The body is woven through the spokes of the wheel, and the wheel is hoisted onto a pole. The condemned is left there to die from exposure, shock, and pain. It can take hours or even days. You're required to check on them periodically, to report their status to the authorities. You watch them suffer slowly, and there's nothing you can do to speed their death without risking your own execution for showing mercy. Impalement is another horrific method, though more common in Eastern Europe than Western. A long stake is inserted through the body, usually from the rectum upward, carefully avoiding vital organs so the condemned dies slowly. It requires precision and a strong stomach. The condemned can live for hours or days impaled on the stake, displayed as a warning. You're the one who positions the stake, who inserts it, who ensures it's done correctly. The screams, the blood, the sheer brutality of it. It's beyond description. Some executions are designed to be humiliating as well as fatal. For example, traitors might be hanged, drawn, and quartered. But the process is drawn out for maximum shame. They're dragged through the streets on a wooden frame, pelted with filth by the crowd, then partially hanged, cut down while still alive, castrated, disemboweled, and finally beheaded and quartered. Each step is performed publicly, methodically. You're the master of ceremonies, ensuring each stage is completed correctly, that the crowd can see everything, that the message, "This is what happens to traitors," is clear. And then there are the experimental methods, the one-off executions where the magistrate or lord decides to try something new. Maybe they've heard about a method used in another country and want to replicate it. Maybe they have a personal grudge and want the condemned to suffer uniquely. You're given vague instructions and expected to figure it out. It's like being a chef creating a new recipe, except the dish is death, and the ingredients are human bodies. These executions are the most stressful, because there's no established procedure, no proven technique. You're improvising, and if it goes wrong, you're blamed. Every method requires different tools, different skills, different psychological fortifications. You have to be a carpenter, a metal worker, a butcher, and a showman all at once. And through it all, you have to maintain a facade of professionalism, of detachment, as if what you're doing is normal, routine, acceptable. It's horror, pure and simple. And no amount of practice or experience makes it anything else. Now, let's talk about the children. Not your children, though we've discussed them. Let's talk about the children you're sometimes forced to execute. Because medieval justice didn't always distinguish between adults and minors, a child who committed a serious crime could be sentenced to death just like an adult. And you're the one who has to carry out that sentence. The first time you're ordered to execute a child, you feel sick. The condemned is a boy, maybe 12 years old, convicted of theft. He stole a silver cup from a merchant's stall. In the harsh economy of medieval times, theft is a serious crime, and repeat offenders face execution. This boy has been caught stealing before. He's been whipped, branded, and warned. But he stole again, probably because he was starving, because he had no other way to survive. The law doesn't care about his reasons. The sentence is death by hanging. You look at this child, skinny and scared, and you see your own son. He's about the same age, same height, same frightened eyes. How can you put a rope around a child's neck and kill him? But the sentence has been passed. The magistrate is watching. The crowd is waiting. You try to be gentle, if such a thing is possible. You speak to the boy quietly, telling him it will be quick, that he won't suffer. You're lying, of course. Hanging is never quick for someone so light. But you want to offer some comfort, however false. He's crying, calling for his mother, who may be dead, or simply too ashamed to be present. You position him on the scaffold, place the noose around his small neck, and say a silent prayer. Then you pull the lever, and he hangs there strangling slowly because he doesn't weigh enough to break his neck. His small body twitches and kicks, legs flailing uselessly. You watch, frozen, unable to look away. unable to help. The crowd is silent, uncomfortable. Even they, jaded by years of public executions, are disturbed by the sight of a child dying. It takes almost 15 minutes. 15 agonizing, soul-destroying minutes. When he finally stops moving, you cut him down and carry his small, broken body to the cart. His weight is nothing, barely more than a sack of grain, and you realize you've just killed a child. And there's no coming back from that. These executions are the worst. They strip away any remaining pretense that what you do is just or necessary. You're killing children, and no amount of legal justification makes it right. The nightmares after these executions are different, more vivid, more haunting. You see the child's face, hear his cries, feel his small body in your arms, and you know, with absolute certainty, that you're damned. The aftermath of child executions is also different. The crowd disperses in uncomfortable silence. The officials who ordered the execution avoid your eyes. Even your fellow outcasts, the criminals and prostitutes, who normally don't judge you, look at you with a mixture of horror and pity. You've crossed a line, done something that even in a brutal world is considered beyond the pale, and you carry that weight forever. Some executioners, after being forced to execute a child, break completely. They refuse to do it again, accepting their own execution, rather than repeat the horror. Others become colder, harder, shutting down emotionally to the point where they can kill anyone, even children, without visible reaction. But inside, they're dying. The humanity that made them flinch, that made them hesitate, is being eroded away, leaving behind a hollow shell. And the cruelest part? It happens more than once, because poverty and hunger drive children to crime, and medieval law is unforgiving. You might execute multiple children over the course of your career. Each one adds another layer of horror, another face to the parade of ghosts that haunts you. And each time, you die a little more inside, until there's almost nothing left of the person you used to be. Let's delve into the aftermath of executions in more detail. The actual killing is just the beginning. After the crowd disperses, after the spectacle ends, there's still work to be done. And this work, hidden from public view, is in many ways worse than the execution itself. First, there's the body. If the execution was a beheading, you have a headless corpse and a severed head to deal with. The head might need to be displayed on a spike as a warning, mounted on the town gate or a prominent wall. You're responsible for preparing the head, which means cleaning it, preserving it if necessary, and affixing it securely so it doesn't fall and rot on the ground. You handle the head, feeling its weight, seeing the dead eyes stare at you, and you try not to think about the fact that this was a person just hours ago. If the family has been granted permission to claim the body, you prepare it for them. This means sewing the head back onto the neck, which is a grotesque, painstaking task. You thread heavy cord through the tissues, pulling the severed parts together, trying to make the body presentable for burial. Your hands are covered in cold, congealed blood. The smell is overwhelming, a mixture of blood, bile, and the beginning of decay. You work alone, usually at night, by candlelight, in a shed or room near the execution grounds. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the sounds of your work and the occasional gust of wind. If the family doesn't claim the body, or if the condemned was a criminal with no family, disposal falls to you. You load the body onto a cart and drag it to the outskirts of town, to a pit or unmarked grave where criminals are thrown. There's no ceremony, no prayers. You strip anything of value from the corpse, clothing, jewelry, anything you can sell, because that's your right as executioner. Then, you dump the body into the pit and cover it with a thin layer of dirt. Tomorrow, scavengers, dogs, rats, crows will come to feast. But that's not your problem, because you have to return to the execution site and clean up. The scaffold is covered in blood, sometimes other fluids if the condemned lost control of their bodily functions in their final moments. You scrub the wood with water, trying to remove the stains, but blood seeps into the grain and never fully disappears. Over time, The scaffold becomes dark and stained, a grim testimony to the countless deaths that have occurred on it. You also have to maintain your tools. The axe needs to be cleaned and sharpened. Blood can dull a blade and cause rust. You spend time with your whetstone, sharpening the edge to a razor finish, testing it against paper or hair. The rope used for hanging needs to be inspected for wear and replaced if necessary. The scaffold itself needs repairs. Loose boards nailed down, weak joints reinforced. This maintenance is crucial because a failure during an execution is disastrous for your reputation and dangerous for everyone involved. Then there's the psychological aftermath. After an execution, especially a difficult or botched one, you're exhausted, not just physically but emotionally and mentally. You return to your isolated home and you collapse. Maybe you drink, trying to drown the memories. Maybe you pray, begging God for forgiveness. Maybe you just sit in silence, staring at nothing, replaying the execution in your mind, wondering what you could have done differently, what you should have done differently. The faces of the condemned come to you in dreams. Sometimes they accuse you, curse you, blame you for their deaths. Sometimes they're silent, just staring, their dead eyes following you wherever you go in the dreamscape. Sometimes the dreams are worse. You're the one being executed, feeling the rope around your neck, the axe on your neck, the fire consuming you. You wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, unsure for a moment whether you're alive or dead. Your family bears the brunt of your psychological state. You're distant, irritable, prone to sudden outbursts or long silences. Your wife tries to comfort you, but what can she say? She knows what you do, knows the horror you face, but she can't truly understand because she hasn't experienced it. Your children sense your distress and stay away, scared of your mood swings, confused by your behavior. Over time, the accumulation of these aftermaths, the physical labor, the psychological toll, the emotional isolation, wears you down. You start to age rapidly, your body and mind both deteriorating under the strain. You develop chronic pains, stomach problems, insomnia. You're falling apart, piece by piece, and there's no one to help you. No support system, no therapy. You just endure, day after day, execution after execution, until you either die or break completely. Let's talk about the rare moments of humanity, the times when you're allowed to be more than just an executioner. They're fleeting, but they matter because they're all you have. Sometimes, a condemned person asks you for a favor in their final moments. They might ask you to deliver a message to their family, or to ensure their children are cared for, or simply to pray for their soul. These requests are heartbreaking because you're the last person they can turn to, the last human contact they'll ever have. And despite everything, despite the horror of your role, you try to honor these requests. You remember a woman condemned for heresy. She was young, maybe 30, accused of speaking against the church. The evidence was fabricated. Everyone knew it. But the sentence stood. In her final hours, she asked you to find her daughter and give her a small wooden cross, the only possession she had. She wanted her daughter to know she was loved, that her mother's last thoughts were of her. After the execution, after the fire had burned out and the body was ash, you went looking for the daughter. It took days, but you found her, living with an aunt in a nearby village. You gave her the cross and delivered her mother's message. The girl cried, clutching the cross, and thanked you. For a moment, you weren't the executioner. You were just a man who kept a promise. It didn't erase the horror of what you'd done, but it gave you a tiny shred of humanity to hold on to. Or consider the times when the condemned show you kindness. It's rare, but it happens. A man sentenced to hanging might thank you for treating him with respect, for not adding unnecessary cruelty to his final hours. A woman facing the stake might tell you she doesn't blame you, that she knows you're just doing your job. These small gestures of forgiveness and understanding are lifelines in a sea of horror. They remind you that you're still human, that you're capable of compassion, that not everyone sees you as a monster. There are also moments of solidarity with other outcasts, the prostitute who doesn't flinch when you walk by, the beggar who shares his food with you when you're hungry, the leper who greets you without fear. These people, pushed to the margins of society just like you, don't judge you. They understand what it's like to be cast out, to be hated for circumstances beyond your control. You form tentative friendships with them, finding solace in shared suffering. And then there are the moments alone, away from the town, away from your role. You might walk into the forest, sit by a stream, and just breathe. For a little while, you're not the executioner. You're just a man, enjoying the sound of running water, the rustle of leaves, the warmth of the sun. These moments are precious because they're the only times you can truly escape, the only times you can remember who you were before the blood and death consumed your life. But these moments are rare and fleeting. They're tiny islands of peace in an ocean of horror, and they're never enough to truly heal you, to undo the damage that's been done. But there's something, and when you have nothing else, something is better than nothing. Finally, let's address the question that's probably been on your mind this entire time. Were there any medieval executioners who found redemption, who escaped the curse of their profession, who managed to reclaim their humanity? The answer is complicated. There are stories, legends, really, of executioners who found peace. One famous tale tells of an executioner who, after decades of service, was granted a pardon by a grateful lord. He was allowed to retire with a small pension, and he spent his remaining years in seclusion, living in a monastery, praying and doing penance. He never spoke of his past, and the monks never asked. When he died, he was buried in consecrated ground, his sins forgiven. Or so the story goes. Another legend speaks of an executioner who saved a nobleman's life during a riot. The grateful nobleman used his influence to free the executioner from his duties and set him up with a new identity in a distant town. The executioner became a carpenter, married, had children, and lived a quiet, normal life. No one in his new town knew his past. He took his secret to the grave, and only after his death did his wife find his old tools and understand what he had been. Whether she was horrified or sympathetic, the legend doesn't say. But these are legends, stories told to give hope, to suggest that redemption is possible. The reality was almost always darker. Most executioners served until they died, trapped in their role by law, by circumstance, by the simple fact that no one else would do the job. They died broken, alone, and damned, with no redemption, no escape, no peace. A few managed to break free by fleeing. They abandoned their towns, their families, their identities, and disappeared into the anonymity of larger cities or foreign lands. But they carried their past with them, always looking over their shoulders, always afraid of being recognized, always haunted by the faces of the dead. Freedom from the job didn't mean freedom from the memories, and so we come to the end of our exploration. You've spent this entire journey inside the mind and life of a medieval executioner. You've felt the isolation, the horror, the psychological torment. You've seen the blood, heard the screams, carried the weight of countless deaths, and hopefully, you understand why you wouldn't last a day in this profession. The medieval executioner was a tragic figure, a man caught in an impossible situation, forced to commit atrocities in the name of justice, hated for doing what society demanded of him. He was essential, but despised, necessary, but cursed. His life was a slow descent into psychological hell, with no escape, no redemption, and no peace. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, be grateful. Grateful for the world you live in, where such roles are no longer needed, where justice is, theoretically, more humane, where you're not forced to be the physical instrument of death. And spare a thought, just a brief one, for the medieval executioners, the forgotten men who carried burdens no one should ever have to carry, who did their duty at the cost of their souls, and who were erased from history as thoroughly as if they never existed. Because you wouldn't last a day as a medieval executioner, and that's not a weakness. That's proof that you still have a soul, still have compassion, still have the capacity to recognize horror for what it is. Because in a world that sometimes seems to be sliding backward, that humanity is precious. But before we close this dark chapter, let's examine one final aspect: the executioner's perspective on his own approaching death. Because after spending a lifetime dealing death to others, how does an executioner face his own mortality? For most executioners, the thought of death is complicated. On one hand, it represents escape, an end to the suffering, the isolation, the nightly parade of faces in your dreams. Death is release, and after decades of service, you're ready for it. But on the other hand, death is terrifying because you know, deep in your soul, that you're damned. You've killed people, dozens, maybe hundreds, depending on how long you served. Some were guilty, some were innocent. All were human, and you, with your own hands, ended their lives. You tell yourself you were following orders, that you had no choice, that it was your duty. But in the dark hours before dawn, when sleep won't come and the ghosts are especially restless, you know the truth. And killers don't go to heaven. The church offers little comfort. Most priests treat you with barely concealed disgust. Confession is awkward, humiliating. You kneel in the confessional booth and you can hear the priest's sharp intake of breath when you begin listing your sins. How do you confess to hundreds of killings? How do you seek absolution for a lifetime of horror? The priest gives you penance, prayers, fasting, charity, but you both know it's not enough. How many prayers does it take to wash away the blood of hundreds? How much fasting can cleanse your soul? The math doesn't work. You're beyond saving. Some executioners become obsessed with buying their way into heaven. You donate money to the church, commission prayers for your soul, pay for masses to be said in your name. You try to accumulate enough good deeds to balance the scales, to tip them in your favor when judgment comes. But it never feels like enough. You lie awake at night, calculating, bargaining with God. If I donate this much, if I pray this many times, if I help this many people, will it be enough? The answer is always no. Nothing is ever enough. Others give up entirely on the idea of salvation. You're damned, full stop, and there's no point pretending otherwise. You stop praying. Stop attending church. Stop seeking forgiveness. If you're going to hell anyway, why bother? This nihilism can be freeing in a way. You're no longer trying to be good, no longer struggling against your fate. You accept the inevitable and try to find what pleasure or peace you can in your remaining years. As your health fails, as your body starts to shut down, the fear intensifies. You've seen so many people die. You know what it looks like, sounds like, feels like. And now it's your turn. You wonder, will it hurt? Will there be a moment of awareness after death? A terrible realization of what comes next? Or will it just be darkness, oblivion, nothingness? You don't know which is worse. Your family prepares for your death in practical ways. Your son, if you have one, prepares to take over the profession. He's been training for years, but now it's real. You're dying, and he's going to replace you. You want to tell him to run, to escape, to refuse the inheritance, but you don't, because you know it's pointless. He has no choice, just like you had no choice. Your wife sits by your bedside, holding your hand. She's aged alongside you, worn down by the isolation and shame. She doesn't speak much, but her presence is comforting. She's the only person who has stayed with you through everything, who hasn't abandoned you despite the horror of your profession. You squeeze her hand, trying to convey gratitude, love, regret. When death finally comes, it's often not dramatic, No last-minute redemption, no divine intervention, no peaceful acceptance. Your breathing slows, your heartbeat weakens, and then it stops. Your wife cries softly. Your son stands in the corner, face unreadable, already thinking about the weight that's now on his shoulders. Your body is prepared for burial. There's no elaborate funeral, no procession through town, no mourners lining the streets. Your family buries you quickly, quietly, before dawn, when most people are still asleep. The grave is unmarked, or marked with a simple stone, bearing no name. The church might allow you to be buried in consecrated ground if you made enough donations, or if the priest is feeling charitable. But more often, you're buried in the section reserved for criminals and outcasts, your final resting place as isolated as your life was. Within days, people have forgotten you died. Your name isn't mentioned. Your life isn't celebrated. You're erased, and everyone is relieved. The new executioner takes over, and life continues as if you never existed. That's your legacy. Nothing. A blank space where a person used to be. But here's the thing. You did exist. You were a person, with thoughts and feelings, fears and hopes. You suffered immensely, carried burdens that would have destroyed most people, and somehow you survived. Your life wasn't worthless, even if society treated you as if it was. You were human, flawed and broken, but human. In the centuries since, historians have occasionally stumbled upon records of medieval executioners. Scattered documents, accounting books listing payments, legal records of appointments. These fragments are all that remain of most executioners. No portraits, no biographies, no memorials, just names in ledgers, if that. But even these sparse records tell a story. They confirm that you existed, that you were real, that your suffering was real. In a strange way, your story has come full circle. You spent your life being erased, forgotten, treated as if you were less than human, but now, centuries later, people are trying to remember you. Historians are researching your profession, trying to understand what it was like, what it did to you, how you survived. This video, this journey we've taken together, is part of that remembering. You're not forgotten anymore. Your story is being told, and maybe, in some small way, that matters. Maybe the fact that people now understand, that they can empathize with your suffering, that they can see you as a victim as well as a perpetrator, offers a kind of posthumous redemption. Not in the religious sense, but in the human sense. You're being acknowledged, your humanity recognized, your suffering validated. It doesn't undo the horror, but it's something. It's more than you got in life. So to every medieval executioner who lived and died in isolation, who carried burdens no one should have to carry, who was erased from history and memory, you're seen now. Your story has been told. And while it can't change what happened, while it can't ease your suffering, maybe it can serve as a warning, a reminder of what happens when society creates impossible roles, when it demands that some people sacrifice their humanity for the supposed greater good, when it treats human beings as disposable tools. Your suffering wasn't meaningless. It teaches us something important about justice, about humanity, about the costs of the systems we create. And maybe, just maybe, by understanding your story, by recognizing the horror you endured, we can build a world where no one ever has to be an executioner again, where justice doesn't require the destruction of the person administering it, where we don't create monsters and then hate them for being monstrous, not the deaths you caused, but the lesson your life teaches, that every system of justice has a human cost, that the people who carry out society's dirty work are human too, and they suffer for what they're forced to do, that we should never create roles that destroy the people who fill them. So, as we finally close this dark chapter, as we step away from the blood-soaked scaffold and return to our comfortable modern lives, let's carry that lesson with us. Let's remember the medieval executioners, not with hatred or fear, but with understanding and compassion. They were victims of their time, Their society, their circumstances. They did terrible things, yes, but they were also destroyed by those things. And let's be grateful, one final time, that we live in a world where such roles are no longer necessary, where justice, imperfect as it is, doesn't require one person to bear the weight of everyone's deaths, where we can condemn actions without destroying the person performing them, where humanity, messy and complicated as it is still valued and protected. Because that's what separates us from the medieval world. Not our technology, not our wealth, not our comfort, but our recognition that every human life has value, that every person deserves dignity, that no one should be sacrificed on the altar of justice or social order. That's what it means to be human in the best sense of the word. And remember, you wouldn't last a day as a medieval executioner, but you don't have to. And that's a blessing we should never take for granted.